helicopters are relatively new to the aviation scene, emerging only after World War II. However, in that short time, valiant engineers have frequently attempted to improve on these flying machines, resulting in a variety of strange and outlandish machines. From helicopters that resemble planes to alien helicopters, here is a list of the strangest helicopters ever created. Mil V12. One of the Soviet Union's specialties was building massive airplanes. So it's no surprise that the Soviet-designed Mil V12 has the largest helicopter ever produced, a record that hasn't been broken since the V-12's first flight in 1967. Mil began development of the monster helicopter in response to a Soviet Air Force requirement for a large, heavy-lift helicopter with payload comparable to the fixed-wing Antonov 22 transport airplane. In particular, the Soviets wanted a helicopter capable of carrying missiles and other similar loads. The V-12 may also have found civilian use for hoisting large loads, especially in remote areas of Siberia where runways were not long enough for large transport aircraft. However, the V-12 suffered a setback when the first flight test in 1967 ended in disaster when the first V-12 lost power and crashed. Fortunately, the airframe was not completely destroyed, allowing Mil to repair it and continue testing. Despite impressive test results, by the time the V-12 was ready for production, the Soviet Air Force had made tactical doctrine changes that rendered the V-12 obsolete. Mil did not destroy the prototypes, and both are still on display in Russian air museums. Rotodyne ferry. In the 1950s, Ferry Aviation in Britain designed and constructed the ferry Rotodyne, a compound gyroplane intended for both commercial and military use. A helicopter that set a world's helicopter speed record. The Rotodyne was powered by a tipjet rotor that burned a combination of fuel and compressed air bled from two wing-mounted Napier Eland turboprops. The rotor was driven for vertical takeoffs, landings, and hovering, as well as low-speed translational flight, but auto-rotated during cruise flight, with all engine power directed toward two propellers. A single prototype was created. Despite the Rotodyne's promising concept and successful trials, the program was ultimately cancelled. The cancellation was attributed to the type failing to attract commercial orders, which was due in part to concerns about the high levels of rototipjet noise produced in flight, and because the project was government-funded. Politics also played a role in the lack of orders, which ultimately doomed the project. Avro Canada VZ9 AV Avrocar. The Avro Canada VZ9 Avrocar was a VTOL aircraft developed by Avro Canada as part of a top-secret US military project carried out in the early years of the Cold War. The Avrocar planned to use the co-ander effect to generate lift and thrust from a single turbo-rotor blowing exhaust out of the disc-shaped aircraft's rim. It would have looked like a flying saucer in the air. Originally designed as a fighter-like aircraft capable of very high speeds and altitudes, the project was repeatedly scaled back over time, and the US Air Force eventually abandoned it. The development was later taken over by the US Army because of the need for a tactical fighter and a high-performance helicopter. Production began in 1958, and engineers built only 2 models in 2 years at a cost of $10 million. However, the problem with the project engineers struggled to get the Avrocar more than a few feet off the ground without encountering major issues. During testing, the Avrocar experienced and resolved thrust and stability issues, limiting it to low flight performance, which ultimately doomed the project. Hughes XH-17. Helicopters are frequently used as flying cranes to transport heavy and large loads to locations inaccessible by regular airplanes. In 1952, Hughes Aircraft Company recognized this opportunity to create a helicopter that could perform such work. They created the XH-17, a heavy-lift rotorcraft with the ability to lift loads greater than 15 metric tons. With a massive 36-meter rotor system, at the time, the XH-17 was the largest helicopter in the world. Parts of the XH-17 were scavenged from other aircraft to speed up construction and reduce production costs. For the airframe, Hughes used a variety of World War II aircraft. A B-25 bomber provided the undercarriage, a CG-15 glider provided the cockpit, and a B-29 bomber provided the large fuel tank. When testing began, the XH-17 was a frightening sight. The constant combustion from the jet engines on the rotortips sounded like 1,000 artillery shells going off. When the helicopter took off, people up to 13 kilometers away could hear it. Testing also showed that it had a very small range of only about 60 kilometers and thrust problems. Testing continued intermittently for 3 years before Hughes came to the conclusion that the helicopter would never be a practical system. Sikorsky CH-37C Mojave. The Sikorsky CH-37 Mojave was an American large heavy-lift helicopter of the 1950s. This strange-looking plane provided good service as Sikorsky produced 156 models. The CH-37C was a large, heavy-lift helicopter which had its first flight in 1956 and was one of the last helicopters to use a piston engine, which was larger, heavier but less powerful than the turboshaft engines. Because it was the most powerful US-made helicopter at the time, it assisted in the recovery of spy satellite film capsules that descended from space via parachute. Kamov Ka-22. When it comes to extremely bizarre aircraft designs, the Ka-22 was no exception. It was the first aircraft to cruise like an airplane and take off like a helicopter. It was created to compete with helicopters like the Mi-6 as a military heavy cargo helicopter. Essentially a fixed-wing aircraft, the Ka-22 had rotors mounted above the wingtips. Each wingtip had an engine mounted there that drove a 4-bladed tractor propeller as well as a 4-bladed main rotor. The Kamov Ka-22 was an exciting helicopter that broke 8 world records in total, but it was doomed by 2 unfortunate crashes. The first prototype was destroyed in a deadly crash, and the third prototype was lost in a crash a year later. These crashes left the helicopter without any support, which caused the remaining 2 prototypes to be scrapped. Piasecki H-21. The Piasecki H-21 was an American helicopter, the 4th in a series of tandem rotor helicopters designed and built by Piasecki Helicopter. This multi-mission helicopter, dubbed the Flying Banana, was equipped with wheels, floats, and skis. The helicopter was equipped with winterization features that allowed it to operate in temperatures as low as -65 degrees Fahrenheit. Piasecki designed the H-21 as an Arctic rescue helicopter. The H-21B's improved capabilities allowed it to carry 22 equipped infantrymen or 12 stretchers, as well as 2 medical attendants. The helicopter was manufactured from 1952 to 1959. Mil V12. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union and its allies relied on the Mil V12. It was built in large numbers for both military and civil purposes, and was the largest helicopter in production until the Mil V-26 was introduced in 1980. It proved to be the fastest helicopter, setting several world speed records early in her career. Its toughness ensured her active duty in far-flung Siberian territories. Despite its excellent performance, the Mil V was retired in 2002 due to reports that the wooden tail rotor blades had reached the end of their lifespan. The XC-142 was a tri-service tilt-wing experimental aircraft designed to investigate the operational suitability of vertical short takeoff and landing transports. The helicopter would take off vertically, then switch to forward flight, only to return when landing. The fuselage was large and boxy, with a tilted rear area and a loading ramp. However, the aircraft was never developed beyond the prototype stage. While tests were still ongoing, the Air Force requested a proposal for a production version of another aircraft. Kaman K-MAX Gy-1000-100. The Kaman K-MAX is a Kaman aircraft helicopter with intermeshing rotors. It is designed for external cargo load operations and can lift a payload weighing more than 6,000 pounds, which is greater than the helicopter's empty weight. To say that the K-MAX resembles a tick wouldn't be an understatement. The K-MAX has a frame width of 2.5 feet. The helicopter's two rotors keep it stable and give the pilot excellent visibility. Production began in 1991 and ended in 2003 before restarting in 2015, with an unmanned version produced since 1998. The Sikorsky SR-54 Tahe. The Ch-54, also known as the Skycrane or flying insect, was a heavy cargo carrier that first entered service in 1962. Its unusual design made it a very versatile helicopter with many uses, including recovery, rescue, infantry transport, medical supply, and even armored transport operations. The helicopter, which was powered by two Pratt & Whitney T7 3P700 turbosaft engines, also had a crane in the center of its fuselage. The helicopter made its debut during the Vietnam War and was widely regarded as one of the safest to fly. With a maximum payload of 12 tons, it could transport heavy ground vehicles, containers, and parts for engineering projects such as bridges and fortifications. The Skycrane was decommissioned from military service in 1991, but it is still used for government and civilian operations.